Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a video where I'm going to rank 10 random palettes in my collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my Tiny Decisions app and I'm going to randomize 10 palettes, and whichever 10 I get I'm going to have to rank within my collection. I thought this would be fun. I did a ranking of my 2022 palettes recently, but I thought this would make or give a chance for me to rank some of my older palettes as well, because I don't really rank my older palettes very often. I usually do, like, you know, newer palettes ranking, obviously, like the yearly ones. I've also done my indie palette ranking, which is also some of my newer ones. So I thought it would be fun to do a video like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick my 10 palettes, but before I jump in and do that, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I have my eyeshadow palettes all here in a wheel, and I'm just going to go ahead and randomize the first palette. And the first one we get is going to be my Sydney Grace Tiny Morals palette. Okay, I'm taking screenshots just so we don't forget them. Let's take the second palette. The Anastasia Sultry palette. Okay, let's go for the third one. We get the BH Cosmetics Blueberry Muffin palette. Okay. For palette number 4, we have the Beauty Bay Love Notes palette. Then for the next one, which I believe is the 5th one, right? We get the Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette. Okay, not much left of that palette, but that is the next one. We're gonna move on to the Colourpop Aha Honey palette. Okay, I think that's 7 palettes. Is it 7 or 6? 6 maybe. I'll look in a second. But the next one is the Sydney Grace California Coast palette. Another Sydney Grace palette. Let me just double check how many I have, just so I don't roll too many. So we have 7 palettes, so 3 more to go. And the next one we get is gonna be Pat McGrath Divine Rose 1. Okay, the second to last one is going to be the Sydney Grace Mountain Trail palette. I think that's all my Sydney Grace palettes. Interesting that all of them got picked, but that's fine. And then lastly we have the Colourpop Sweet Talk palette. So I think that should be 10. Let me just double check. Yes, that is 10. I'm going to go ahead and pick out those palettes and I will go and rank them, and I will be back. So I'm back and it's been a little while. The angle might have changed because my dog knocked the tripod when I was sorting out the palettes. But I have sorted my palettes out in order from least favorite to favorite out of the 10 that I rolled. Some of them were quite difficult to rank, but I think I'm happy with my rankings. So I'm going to go through them in order. So the palette that comes in 10th spot is my Aha Honey palette from Colourpop. This one I think is a good palette still, and I still like parts of it, but I rarely reach for this one as a standalone palette. I mainly use this as kind of complementary shades how it looks. The formula in here is fine. The shimmers aren't anything spectacular. Also, I have changed Palooza in the middle to a shimmer because I've taken all my pressed glitters and I have them in my singles collection. But the formula is nothing spectacular, especially with the shimmers. The mattes are fine. They're like the typical Colourpop mattes. And I feel like this palette gives a lot of options for yellows, but again, it's not my favorite, and that's why it's coming in at number 10. It's one that I would consider decluttering or putting into my singles, so that is why it's coming in last. In 9th spot, we have another colourful palette. This one is actually the Blueberry Muffins palette from BH Cosmetics. So this one is one that got rave reviews. A lot of people talked about this as being like the best palette of the year it came out, which I think must have been 2019. But it got really rave reviews, and it is a really good quality palette. It is. I think the quality in here is amazing. The shimmers are very sparkly, very beautiful. Not near my indie shadows though, but they are really good. I do like the kind of these warm tone browns with the blues. I think they pair beautifully. I think it's a very unique color story, and it does give a lot to my collection, but I just don't reach for it. I'm kind of past these blues. I'm wearing some blues in Rosetta on my list today, but that's from my Panna palette. But I feel like, yeah, I'm just past this kind of color story. I do think for a blue tone palette you do have the options to do some more neutral looks, which I like, But yeah, it's not my favorite palette, and I got a lot of use out of this, as you can see. So yeah, I don't know, it's just one of those meh palettes for me, so I couldn't rank it higher than number 9. In 8th spot, we have the first out of my 3 Sydney Grace palettes, and this one is the California Coast palette. I think the formula in here is impeccable. It's so good. I say this all the time about Sydney Grace. Their formula is really nice. The mattes are super blendable, super pigmented, really, really lovely. I mean, you use them and you see no difference. Like, you use them 20 times and no difference. Like, they're super pigmented, super hard pressed, but they are like, they're still blendable, they're still very creamy, which I like. The shimmers as well are very metallic. They are more kind of traditional shimmers, like more metallic shimmers rather than sparkly shadows, which is not always my preference, but I do like them. And Sydney Grace is probably my favorite when it comes to those really metallic shades, because they are super metallic and they're also super pigmented, which is nice. The reason why this one is ranking in at number 8 is because it's just a bit deep for what I go for, and all these shades here at the bottom, they might look light when I hold the palette straight on because they are very reflective, but as soon as I tilt the palette you can see that all of the shimmers in here are quite deep. So that's why it's not my favorite. I do like the tones in here. It's quite a unique neutral color story for me, but it's just because the shadows are a bit deeper that I can't rank it higher than it is now. For 8th spot, we have another Colourpop palette. This one is the Sweet Talk palette. Again, I have taken out the pressed glitters and replaced them with shimmer shades. And that is these 2 shadows right here. This palette is lovely. I do really like it. It's one of my, not favorite Colourpop palette, but it was for a while. However, again, the formula of Colourpop is just not my favorite anymore. The color story is pretty. It is quite monotone, even though it's not one of the 9-pan monotone palettes. You still get a lot of similar looks from this palette. This shade Side to Side is a beautiful kind of sparkly shade. That was one of my favorite sparkly shades before I got into energized shadows. Now it doesn't compare. And the color story is beautiful. I love these tones. I feel like they're beautiful, colorful shades for spring and summer. And I can kind of wear them as more neutral shades at that time of year. But this one is coming in at 7th place again because of the formula. I mentioned it so many times in this video, but Colourpop isn't it for me anymore. So that's why this one is ranking where it is. For palette in 6th spot, it is my Modern Renaissance palette, and I'm not going to show you this one because mine is almost empty. I only have 3 shades left, so I'm going to pop a picture instead when I'm talking about it. And this palette, I feel like this was one that I would have ranked lower in a couple, like in the beginning of 2022 before I started panning it. But when I started panning it, I really grew some appreciation with this palette. I think it's a beautiful palette. I kind of fell back in love with it. I wouldn't repurchase it now when I finished it though. But I do think it's a nice color story. It's a perfect one for every day. It has a lot of shades that you can easily use for everyday looks, and I think it's a beautiful one. The only thing that I don't really love is the 2 pink shades, like those fuchsia shades. They're not really my thing. I'm still working on one of them. I'm working on the shade Love Letter. And yeah, it's just a bit intense. And then the 2 shimmer shades in the palette, Vermeer and Primavera, are just more satiny and not my favorite. So I wish it had more impactful shimmers, and I wish those 2 pinks, first of all, wasn't so similar, and second of all, yeah, it was just slightly different tones. I'm just a bit tired of those, maybe it's because I've been panning it though. But yeah, that comes in 6th place. So let's move into the top half of the ranking, and the one in 5th place is actually another Anastasia palette. This is Sultry palette. I love this palette. I actually love it quite a bit more than the Modern Renaissance palette, but it was nothing else that I wanted to rank in between these. The shimmers in here are definitely way more impactful, and there's a good variety of mattes. I feel like you have these really deep ones. You have black obviously, and then this really, really deep brown. You also have a grey, and this grey is actually pretty flattering. So is Cyborg, which is the grey I would say is pairing with that. Those 2 greys are really, really flattering. They have a little bit more pink to them, I would say, which means they are more wearable. So yeah, I really love those. You have a really cool tone brown and then a slightly more warm tone brown. The one matte I don't really love is the shade Bloom. Again, similar to those pink shades in Modern Renaissance, I'm just over this kind of shade. And then the second thing with this palette that doesn't make it perfect is that a lot of these shimmer shades are quite deep. You have Ember and Teak, which are both pretty deep bronzer shades. As you can see, it's this one here and this one here. I feel like those 2 are both shades that I wouldn't prefer. The one that I would prefer over those 2 is the shade Cinder, which is this one in the corner. I would prefer just having that one and switching those 2 shades for something else, but otherwise I really do love this palette. And I do think Anastasia came really far with their palettes between this one and Modern Renaissance, because again the shimmer formula is way better. and I just feel like this is a really beautiful color story. It is discontinued though, so you can't really get this one anymore, but I do think it's a really nice palette, and it's coming in place number 5. In 4th spot we have the second Sydney Grace palette, which is the Mountain Trail palette. This one is the kind of green tone one. The kind of have some like mustard shades, some oranges, and then loads of like olivey greens. I love this palette. I do really love this. It's actually funny because the next palette up and this one were in different order in my 2022 palette ranking, but I just feel like the other one has just topped this one a little bit. We're going into the palettes that I really love now, and this palette is beautiful. I love the shimmers. I already talked about Sydney Grace shimmers, so I won't go over too much. I do feel like some of these shades in here are slightly more sparkly though, especially Be My Sunshine and Light My World, but no, I wouldn't call them sparkly though. They're still very metallic. There are some shades in here that are slightly deeper, again similar to the California Coast palette, but I feel like they are very complementary to the tones in this palette. I love these type of olives. I think they are almost all like neutral tones for me, and like these browns and everything. I just feel like this is such a well-made palette. And yeah, I definitely want to play around with this more this year. I've only had it for about 6 months now, so not a very long time, and yeah, I can't wait to play around with this more. So the palette in 3rd place that I have now switched with the Mountain Trail palette, and they literally were next to each other as well last year in my 2022 ranking. I filmed that a couple weeks ago. I think I can't remember when I filmed that, but it was a couple weeks ago. So something has changed since then. So the palette that has now come up higher than the Mountain Trail palette is my Divine Rose palette from Pat McGrath. I love this palette. It is beautiful. Why it's now topping off the Mountain Trail palette and coming up slightly above it is because this one has more kind of sparkly shades, more special shades, which is just why it kind of is ranking higher. I feel like the color story or like the tones in the Mountain Trail palette are more me. However, the formula and like the sparkliness in the shades in this palette just makes this one slightly more my favorite. Yeah, this palette is actually stunning. The shade here, which is one of their special shadows, is super sparkly. It's like a silvery kind of taupey shade, and it's absolutely stunning. It's one of the most sparkly shades that I have, especially in my palettes collection. In singles I do have a few other sparkly shades, but this one is absolutely stunning. We have like an iridescent like shade right here, like a pink one. It's like pink to orange almost. It's beautiful. Then we have like these two shadows here. We have this gold, which is not the most kind of special shadow, but then we have this one, which is a really strong duochrome from pink to gold. Yeah, this palette is really nice, and the Pat McGrath formula is really good. Is a palette worth the price? If you have the money, yes, but I wouldn't say that you have to save up necessarily and like just get this palette. Like if you saved up and you're considering like maybe buying this palette or one of our other ones, instead of buying like maybe 2 or 3 other ones that you really want, I would just say go for the one you want the most. The formula is really good, but I feel like it's just unnecessary money if you don't have the money, if that makes sense. So yeah, consider other options if you are on a budget or something like that, but if you do have the money, I do think they're really special, and the packaging is just luxurious, and the special shadows are just amazing. So I love them, and I do want to pick up more in the future, but I'm happy with the 3 that I have now. We have 2 more palettes to go. The next one is my Beauty Bay Love Nose palette. This one I love. I feel like this is ranking quite high up now because of the type of tones that I'm into at the moment. I love these kind of romantic pink lighter eye looks at the moment. I just think they're beautiful. I think this one is very effortless. I feel like I could easily build really blended light eyeshadow looks with this palette because you have so much light transition shades. You also have a couple of different tones. You can do more purple looks, you can do more kind of peachy looks, some pink looks, or like a neutral look with those shades up here in the corner. So you have really nice options, and all of the looks that you will get from this palette are very romantic, and again, that is what I'm into at the moment. The formula of Beauty Bay is also really nice. The matte formula can sometimes be a bit tricky, especially with deeper shades, because you have to build, I don't know, they're hard to build on top of each other, but I feel like this palette is really good, and I feel like their newer palettes have gotten better. And then the shimmer formula is absolutely amazing. Their shimmer formulas, they have I would say 2 types. Some of them are more kind of dry feeling and not as nice. They're not, they're not as intense as some of the other ones. Some of them are more almost like hard panny, and then I have some that are more potty like, very sparkly, very beautiful. And I feel like every single shadow in here, all the shimmers, are that potty formula that I really prefer. So this palette is a really good one. I'm gonna try to get more use out of this one this year. I have a pan in here and I have a dip in this one. I'm actually panning this one at the moment, so a little spoiler there on where my progress is. But yeah, I just love this palette a lot and I do want to continue working on this one this year. So if you remember the palettes, you might know what is coming in at number 1, and I had to give it to the Tiny Marvels palette. I think this one is beautiful. Like, this color story is stunning. Again, you have those more kind of pastel-y tones. This one isn't as like romantic perhaps as the Lovelies palette, but you have, it's more kind of muted colorful shades, I would say, and I just really love that. The shimmers in here again is a typical Christina Grace formula. I love them, especially Scarab and Firebuds. Those are my 2 favorite shades in here. You also have this really bright gold, which is stunning. I love this shadow too. This one which is more of a rose gold, and then this one which is also like a rose gold but more pink rose gold, versus this one is slightly more taupey rose gold. And the mattes in here are again very good. This one was my product level up palette for level 3, so I've used this palette a lot. I did get 1 pan in there and a couple dips, but you can see again with the mattes, I used all of them at least 3 times, some of them even more, way more, and you can't even tell. That's kind of what I mean with Sydney Grace. But this formula is their top-notch formula. I have mentioned before that some of the shadows that I've tried are like not as good as some of the other ones, but the shadows in here are the best of the best. I think this color story again is just really well thought out of, and I just think you can get so many different looks with this palette. You can get a lot of neutral looks, you can get some pop of colors, you can create more kind of cool tone looks or warm tone looks, you can create autumn looks or summer looks. You can have, like, you have so many options in here. You can create like some spring tones looks as well with like the more kind of pastel shades. And yeah, I think this palette is overall a really good one, and I'm so happy to have it in my collection. So that was me ranking 10 random palettes in my collection. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want me to do this again with a new set of 10 random palettes, let me know. Let me know what your favorite palette recently have been. I really have been loving the Love Notes palette. I'm on a roll with that palette. I just love it, especially since I'm panning one of the shades in there now. I just been loving reaching for that one, and I've also really been loving the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. Is more of a winter tone palette, so I think that's beautiful to reach for at the moment. But anyway, those were the 10 palettes, and I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.